Today's episode of Seriously Wrong is brought to you by Idea of Hypocrisy Comfort Blankets.
These soft, luxurious blankets are woven from 100% pure idea of hypocrisy, so you can wrap yourself up in the hypocrisy of your enemies as a comforting security blanket type thing to just feel warm and safe and cozy this upcoming winter.
I don't feel good. I feel like I'm not doing enough to combat racism, sexism, transphobia, ableism, and the climate crisis. I'm not doing enough. What can I do to feel better?
There. You know, the people who are making you feel that way, the people who are criticizing you for not doing enough, I think it's really important. And what this blanket will help with is for you to remember that they aren't doing everything possible to fight those things either. They think they're better than you when they can't even live up to the ideals themselves.
Wow, I feel so cozy. They think they're so great?
Yeah, they think they're great, but they're not.
I feel so much better.
They think they're so great and they think you're so bad, even though they aren't doing the thing that they're saying you aren't doing either.
They can't even do it. I hate them more than I'm worried I'm not good enough, and that feels so cozy.
Soft and pleasant Idea of Hypocrisy Comfort Blankets. Proud sponsor of today's episode of Seriously Wrong.
Comfort blanket, man. No one's actually criticized me for my behavior. Does that mean I shouldn't take the blanket?
Oh, no, that's completely fine. You can just imagine someone criticizing you for your behavior and then imagine that they're hypocritical.
Who do they think they are? Thank you.
Seriously?
Boys are stupid.
Seriously?
Wrong.
Seriously?
Are they wrong?
I think they're wrong 100%. Sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they're wrong.
Seriously?
They're always wrong.
That is absolute
Wrong.
Seriously?
Is so wrong. Wrong. Very nice words, but happens to be wrong.
Seriously?
Seriously?
Wrong.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Seriously Wrong podcast. My name is Aaron, and this is Sean.
Hey, nice to meet you. My name's Sean. I co-host the Seriously Wrong podcast with Aaron.
And now we're doing a podcast episode about hypocrisy.
Yes, the idea of hypocrisy. The episode isn't complaining about hypocrites. The episode is talking about how the idea
It's problematizing the idea of hypocrisy, the concept itself, what are we referring to?
Yeah, what do we mean? What are the different definitions? How do they intersect reality when it comes to hypocrisy?
Yeah, and how useful of a concept is it politically for achieving the political ends that we want?
Yeah, it's strange what a focus it is. And this is something like hypocrisy is something I've been thinking about for a while. Like, first asked myself this question like years ago. The core question that I brought to Aaron that started this journey towards producing this episode was like, is this idea of hypocrisy really working for us? Does it actually make sense? Is it actually helping us? Like the base idea being like, it's bad to advocate for one thing and then do another, especially for other people, being like, you can never pick your nose, and then the Polaroids come out of that guy picking his nose.
Right.
That's the hypocrite. And like, sure, yeah, okay. It's inconsistent, it's funny, it's dramatic. I think it's part of why it carries that resonance.
I think, I feel like it's more of like a human drama thing, and it's like, it's enjoyable to point it out, but like, on a fundamental level, it doesn't actually say anything about whether picking your nose is wrong, whether the person who said it picked their nose or not. It actually doesn't matter to the point. So like when you're calling someone out on their hypocrisy, they have the legitimate reaction or idea, belief that, okay, maybe I am a bit of a hypocrite, if they'll even admit that internally, but that doesn't change my point. The point is still right. Or like, yeah, this politician I like doesn't do what they say that everyone should do. They're not following these beliefs perfectly, but the beliefs are still good. So it kind of misses the mark in that way. It's a bit more emotionally satisfying than making any actual point about any political topic. As character assassination, it might work in like an election. Like that, at least there's some purchase there. But in terms of the actual idea you're addressing, it doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think the point about are you violating a good principle or a bad, are you doing the right thing against a bad principle, or are you doing the wrong thing against a good principle is like a serious qualitative question that's more important than the contradiction in the first place in a way.
Yeah.
But yeah, like what the thing that I noticed that was like, do I believe in hypocrisy? Like, should we try to abolish the idea of hypocrisy or reform it? Is this politically working? As I noticed that on the political right, the liberals and leftists are constantly pointing out the hypocrisy of the right and the far right. A lot of energy, like your Jon Stewart's, your Stephen Colbert's, your one with the glasses on HBO. They spend a lot of time being like, you said this, but then you did this. Like, he's homophobic, but they caught him being gay, you know? And like, but it doesn't matter to the right. It doesn't matter to the authoritarian power systems of like the right wing of the political class. Like, it's a fun narrative. It's entertaining. It might make you laugh. So that's one thing, is like the liberals are obsessed with using it against the right, and they're just like impervious to it for some reason.
I think too, sometimes people on the right even see it as like a good thing. Like you mentioned, a homophobic person who got caught having gay sex or whatever. Sometimes that might even be a positive, like, they like, despite the fact that they're dealing with these urges and they've like sinned or whatever, they're still committed ideologically to the right thing. Like, that can be almost seen as a positive, that they're like,
yeah, Donald Trump was on Jeffrey Epstein's jet, and that's how he knows so intimately how to stop Epstein.
Exactly.
That's something someone literally said to us once. But then, okay, but the other aspect of it is like the liberals hypocrisy police themselves in this way that is like crabs in a bucket of like the like seeking traitors instead of converts thing. So
Yeah.
like liberals take it seriously if they're caught being hypocritical. It's like they're like, you defeated me. I'm not allowed to have opinions anymore or participate in politics anymore.
Yeah, nobody's like, oh, it's a good thing that this person who professes feminist values said something misogynistic in private, because at least they're like, despite, you know, not being perfect in their actions, they believe in the right things and profess it publicly. Like, that's the conservative mindset I just described. But yeah, no one on the left would apply that to someone caught doing something in private that conflicts with their publicly stated values.
Yeah, and then on top of that, so you have a tool that's disproportionately used by the liberals against the conservatives fruitlessly, but seems to only harm the liberals the more it's focused on, because they actually care about the values and they're violating good values when they're hypocritical. But there's also this kind of like framework of alleged hypocrisy that isn't even real hypocrisy. It's things like believing that capitalism should be abolished, but despite getting a paycheck, working a job, and so on.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not a violation of your values if you're forced to, like, if you're playing Go Fish and you're like, no, I think Go Fish would be more fun if we were able to hold 12 cards in our hand instead of 8. You're not a hypocrite for playing according to the existing rules of Go Fish in that match where you came up with this idea or whatever. Obviously, Go Fish is a very non-impactful example of this, but the same thing applies to like the game rules of society to a certain degree. Like, there's the way that this kind of stuff, it's like around Occupy, it was like, oh, you're protesting the system, but yet you're using a cell phone. How ironic.
Yeah.
And part of the response to that is like, well, maybe there would be cell phones in a good society. I don't know.
Yeah, that kind of hypocrisy that's like non-hypocrisy that you're describing, I think conservatives or like apolitical people will point out about activists or left-wing people, and it kind of bounces off activists and left-wing people. And it may be like, I think that's almost as ineffective as the way that, as pointing out right-wing hypocrisy is. But it makes conservatives chuckle at each other and be like, yeah, look at how dumb those left-wing people are. But I don't think anyone takes it that seriously.
Yeah, I think the power of those types of like spurious hypocritical narratives are how they are like, they're often in like mass media, and like you mentioned, apolitical people, and like the resonance that it carries with people who aren't heavily politically engaged, I think.
Yeah, it's like, I don't have to listen to these people. They're hypocrites anyway. They're just, you know, drinking their Starbucks on their MacBooks, complaining about capitalism.
Yeah, and which it implied within that is that
they love capitalism secretly, or they love the fruits of it. But
Yeah, because we could only ever have Starbucks and computers with capitalism, which they don't recognize. And they actually maybe also are against Starbucks and computers from existing, but yet use them anyways because they're so useful. Like
there's like a nest of assumptions beneath that like plays into the existing structures because they're the assumptions that hold them up or whatever. Like,
yeah, no, and I've thought about this on like why leftists, like why do they pick on us so much, man? Why do the apoliticals pick on leftists so much? We're not, even if you cherry pick the wildest, most outrageous leftists, like they're rarely that bad.
yeah, I mean, sometimes people find like one thing someone said on Twitter somewhere, like a 2-follower account made some point, and acting like that's the whole of left. That's the position of all left-wing people.
Yeah, they write actual like news articles about 3 like tweets from accounts that have less than 100 followers sometimes. But like worse, they go even further. They will entirely like fabricate fictional misrepresented positions to make up for not being able to find any actual substantive like outliers. Like an example that comes to mind is like a lot of the discourse that you see on Twitter around like fat liberation activists and people who are against fat phobia and stuff. They talk about it in a way that you'd assume that you'd be able to actually find a person who really thinks that no one should ever go to the gym and that doing exercise is fascist and it makes you a cop or something like that, from the way that people talk about it. But that type of stuff just doesn't actually, I've never been able to actually find a TikTok or tweet where people are saying things like that. You'd assume that there'd be some TikToks where they're actually saying all exercise is fascist or whatever, which is how it's like characterized by
glorifying fatness. Is that, I don't know where this phrase came from, but you just see it. They're glorifying. I'm like, what does that mean? Are they drawing it with like a little halo around it and like like glorify? I don't know. It's just a little tick I noticed that bugs me.
Yeah, and it's not. It's fine. Like, we don't need to get into all this, but the the headline on this, on the headline on glorifying fatness is like, if a fat person is feeling themselves, go for it. I'm not trying to police people, like, or if fat people are like,
saying
you go.
Sometimes like a fat person is attractive, or like I'm feeling good, fat, or like I like. Yeah.
Or God forbid, I like being fat. I like my fat life, you know,
Yeah.
and all the wonderful things that come with being fat. And like, why don't they deserve that? Go nuts.
Yeah, totally.
This is all like aside from, I really was like, apart from the fact, like the interests of like the leftist challenge society and so on. So there's this institutional interest to try to brainwash the masses into unreasonably disliking them. Like, what is it about? Why does it carry this kind of purchase of, like, a more apolitical friend of mine recently posted a Facebook status where he's like, a lot of leftists are narcissists. And it's like, which leftist, like, compared to who? Like, what do you?
Yeah, more than the general population, or like.
Yeah, and like, why do we notice that one? Like, if you're encountered with 100 people and there's 11 genuine bona fide narcissists in the room, like hardcore capital N narcissists,
yeah,
and then maybe 2 of them, with a standard statistical distribution of the population, 2 of them are left wing. Like, why? What's with the focus on that? Apart from the fact that I think there's like institutions putting money into promoting ideas and stuff that benefit the social order that we have come up in and inherited. And I think the heart of it is like, this connects to the hypocrisy thing, which is leftism is a big category that has all of these sort of ethical claims about the world in it. And so opposition to sexism, opposition to racism, opposition to the exploitation of workers and so on, all of these things have moral implications. And some of that applies to you as an individual, like, oh, did I buy the immoral computer or the moral computer, or was that joke I laughed at, did that represent some secret hate I have or something like that?
Leftists are saying we should do better as a society, which could imply that you as an individual should do better, and that's like,
yeah, and some people
could be uncomfortable.
Yeah, in some contexts, people are directly challenged like that.
Oh, yeah.
But in most contexts, they're not. But it still carries that resonance. So people feel implicitly judged by the ethical claims of leftism and leftists. And then so therefore the claim of hypocrisy against leftists, the narcissistic leftist narrative or the immoral leftist narrative or the only pretends to care about other people leftist narrative, like that is a feeling like someone told you you're not good enough already sucks. But then if someone tells you you're not good enough and they themselves are like a sneaky bastard who has some special rule for themselves that I'm allowed to do whatever I want, that's really grating in a genuine way.
Yeah. Yeah, there's like it can be like a self-defense mechanism to frame them as like these hypocrites. But like one thing that just occurred to me that's interesting about this is that conservatives, like, you know, like intense conservatives can be very judgmental, very moralizing. Like they, you know, they're talking about like traditional religious morals a lot of the time, like advocating pretty like strict things about like, you know, you shouldn't have premarital sex, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, no gay people. Like they moralize like a lot. And like I'm not saying no one on the left ever moralizes, but the right also moralizes like a lot. But they don't have that same, there's a tendency to almost view that as like, oh, they're like little like dumb kids who are taken in by tradition or whatever. And it's kind of like cute almost the way that they're pushing for these like heavily moralized ideas or calling people evil or saying they're going to burn in hell. Like to the apolitical observer, there's like a feeling that leftists should be these like paragons of virtue. And when they're not, it's like they're narcissistic, manipulative, scheming, intelligent monsters. Whereas conservatives are like, can be saying just as narcissistic shit, but they're like to be pitied almost.
Yeah, that part of what you said there reminded me also of like another layer of the spurious hypocrisy accusation against leftists. Part of the way that this works as an institution of ideology that infinitely harms liberals and the left and leaves the right and fascism unscathed is that taking like the example of some misogynistic joke made in private by someone who is outwardly a feminist. Like, it's kind of an awkward example just in that we're two men talking about feminism here, but I'm just going to commit to it. It is not necessarily in contradiction to be a feminist who makes a misogynist joke in private, depending on what your other values are. And like, depending on the joke, the specific definition of misogyny we're using, who the audience is, the rest of the context, and so on. And I'm not saying this to like justify or let off the hook misogynistic jokes as good or even neutral or anything. I'm just trying to like narrow in on a pedantic point about the structure of hypocrisy. Like, I acknowledge there are people who are interested in gender liberation who feel like there is no such thing as a justifiable misogynistic joke in any context, or any joke that is justifiable by definition is no longer misogynist or whatever. But in order for it to be hypocritical, the person who's making the joke needs to believe that. And in hypocrisy, you're not accountable to other people's values. You're accountable to your own. So this, I hate that this is the specific example we're using to make this point, but and I apologize, but it just pedantically, I think that is important when we're
You're not a hypocrite if you're going against someone else's interpretation of your beliefs or someone else who holds similar beliefs to you that have distinctions that are real. You're only a hypocrite if you're going against your own actual beliefs.
Yeah, and so part of the way that this idea of hypocrisy hurts liberals, the systemic impacts of it, is that if you go out there being like, I'm an environmentalist, we need to beat our IPCC targets, we need to transition to a library society of reduce and repair that gives everyone access to everything they need beyond their wildest dreams within ecological limits. If you say that, okay, this is my position, that we need to have an ecological society, we need to respect the environmental limits of our planet, that advocacy for a specific claim about the environment is treated as a commitment to every possible permutation of environmental behavior. But you're advocating for something particular, but with that is coming like an expansivist, totalizing commitment. If you think that we as a society need to transition to an ecological one, with that comes the implication that you should never use anything plastic, because that's one way you can interpret. You should never ride in a car that has gasoline, not even a little bit.
Or tires made of rubber.
Yeah, this kind of like hypocrite synecdoche where one particular take on one particular point is taken as a commitment to every possible interpretation of the broad values that that particular take represents. That small part being taken as a totalizing commitment is something that it's unique to the way that like liberals and the left are treated. You never see conservatives being held to account by implicitly contradicting some other aspect of the conservative thought matrix, right?
Yeah, yeah. And there's also another thing that's similar but related where if a person has a belief about a systemic change that needs to happen, then they're a hypocrite for not individually doing some, like with the transportation thing. It's like, I believe we should be off fossil fuels entirely. And yet I drive a fossil fuel car because that's like the only kind of cars that I can afford. Just functionally, if you're advocating for a systemic change, that doesn't mean that you're committed to every individual not participating in the current system in the way that it exists, or like, yeah.
And then even if you did too, people would rightly point out that there's fossil fuels elsewhere. Like your electric car was partially created by a system that was, created by fossil fuels. It was shipped here in a fossil fuel truck. Your bike that you ride, it was made in a factory that used energy that sometimes comes from fossil fuels. So you're just in this hypocritical state just for the bold move of declaring that we actually need to abide the environmental limits of our planet. Whereas if you don't make that claim, well then fucking have at it, have the biggest truck possible, but just pour gasoline into the river or whatever. That's the logic of the idea of hypocrisy. It's just idiotic.
Yeah. Advocating for a system change so that you can have that doesn't mean that you're saying within the current system, I can already enact that. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It's not an actual contradiction. But if it can be made to look like a contradiction, then it can be weaponized.
Yeah. I feel like the definition of hypocrisy, like the meaningful, the most meaningful sort of form of hypocrisy is like if someone's using plastic straws in private and outwardly saying, no one should ever use plastic straws. That's like proper hypocrisy by the modern colloquial definition.
No exceptions, all caps, period.
But especially if it's directed at other people, like you're going to be like other people are being punished for it, that there's like outward aggression and like the policing of other people's straws and like the
direct condemnation of other people for like you're a Twitter reply guy who goes around finding pictures of people with plastic straws saying how they're a horrible person, and then the treasure trove of pics of you with plastic straws come out,
and a big plastic straw collection, and just and in your private diary you've written like I've earned
6 straws today.
I used 6 straws today, which is okay because I've stopped the use of at least 12, which is a net. I'm offsetting my straw use. Yeah, that's like real meaningful hypocrisy. And I think that's worth condemning that. But I think it might be more theatrical and fun and funny than it is actually a moral question in itself.
Yeah, I mean, it shows that a person is not acting in accordance with their values, which like you can read as either like a moral failing or maybe just a failing of impulse control in some other context. Like it could be they're Machiavellian and evil. It could be that they're just like a pitiable person who can't control themselves. It depends, but like
the guy who condemns fart porn but late at night, when the world is asleep, he loses control.
He's the loudest voice against fart porn. This in particular is bad. All other porn is fine. But
and he wakes up almost every morning going, oh God, not again.
The tabs are still open.
4 monitors of multiple tabs. Like last night was out of control.
I'm going to have to go even harder against fart porn today to make up for it.
Yes, because I had 20 tabs open. So if I get at least 21 tabs closed through my advocacy, it's still a net positive.
But yeah, it is a weird mental trick again, though, that maybe there's some purchase there and that is a real hypocrisy, but it has nothing to do with the moral goodness or badness of fart porn. And the way that these oh, you're a leftist and you want to make the world better, but yeah, you're using Starbucks and iPhones. it gets used in a way that just, it goes not just to this person as a hypocrite, but the ideals that they're advocating for are unworkable and stupid, which doesn't actually follow from it. Like, even if leftist ideals did mean that you should immediately stop going to Starbucks or using iPhones, any individual leftist doing those things doesn't mean that their ideals are wrong. It just happens to also be true that being a committed anti-capitalist doesn't mean that you are committing to not participating in capitalism in any way, or that you believe iPhones are a necessary outgrowth of capitalism that can't be available elsewhere or whatever. Like, there's multiple layers to it, which is that, like, yeah, it only goes to the person, not the ideals. And even, yeah, so even when it is true, it's a limited critique of a person, not of an ideal.
Yeah. And it's not, I don't know, the fart porn guy, like, his hypocrisy is not the problem there. Like, he should just let it rip. You know, just let it squeak out if it squeaks out, and just, you know, be yourself. And, you know, it's
yeah. It's not that it would be equally good if he was a anti-fart porn crusader who never looked at fart porn, or a pro-fart porn crusader who always looks at fart. It's not that those two options are equally good. It's that, like, there's actually, like, nothing inherently wrong with looking at fart porn. So, like, whether or not he's a hypocrite is kind of beside the point of, like, whether the thing he's advocating for is good or not.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's the advocacy against it that probably creating, you know, social issues in the world that don't need to exist. It's not his uncontrollable late night lust for many, many tabs or whatever, what have you.
Yeah, and this is true in the other direction too. Like, if you look at the homophobic crusader who just can't stop having gay sex, like, it's funny, it's hypocritical in a way, but it also, like, that's not the reason that being a homophobic crusader is wrong, because they just can't resist it. And it's that's kind of baked into the Christian narrative of it, that it's like this temptation towards sin that people are unable to resist because they're demons or whatever coming after you. Like, the reason that it's wrong is that, like, you know, two consenting adults of the same gender being in a relationship doesn't harm anybody, so there's nothing wrong with it on, like, a basic moral level. That's the point. Like, the fact that this person is saying it's wrong while having trouble resisting it says something about their impulse control or their genuineness, perhaps, but nothing about, like, it's wrong for other reasons beside that. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and, like, homophobic advocacy harms people. It's catching them in it and being like, hey, you were on Grindr, you didn't have a separate photo of your face and your dick, you put them both in the same photo, so it's really really easy to connect you to your ministry where you're homophobic. That's great for John Oliver, right? It's entertainment. It's great for the stage. It's great for theater. If you're writing a movie,
it's juicy drama. It is juicy drama.
It's genuinely juicy drama. There's no
getting around that.
And I don't care if you're homophobic or you're pro-homosexual. That is juicy drama.
Yeah.
But it's not politics. The moral issue isn't the contradiction. The moral issue is the harm to people.
Yeah.
I think the hypocrisy idea, the way it takes root in the liberal left community, which overlaps with a lot with, like, the art community and, like, the kind of, like, cultural commons of a society a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of the reason why the liberals have this unquenchable thirst for irony in politics in a way that damages our ability to collectively reason, is because it's so juicy and so fun. And it's like, if you character in the movie happened, that you'd be howling, right?
Yeah.
And Jon Stewart can just say that it happened and then, like, look at the camera or whatever, and people are going ape shit. And he's like,
I'm laughing just imagining it, and I don't even know which hypocrisy he's pointing out.
I think that's one part of, like, the liberal fixation on it. The other part of the liberal fixation is it's like the anxiety of the advocate. You can't really be meaningfully hypocritical unless you're really advocating for something, unless you're, like, really have some value to hold to.
Yeah.
And so people on the left, whether it's animal rights, disability justice, trans liberation, ecological apocalypse, and so on, you're advocating for something, you care about something, and the reason people get into that, I think, is almost never anything other than they genuinely care about it, right? So then the fear, the anxiety of being seen as duplicitous, two-faced, insincere, etc., is, like, a real fear that liberals and leftists carry with them on some level, which sometimes is outwardly articulated as kind of like the seeking traitors rather than converts kind of stuff. Like if you catch other hypocrites, it takes the eye off of you and shows your dedication and so on. And I think these are kind of human follies that are not particular to the left, but have a certain life within the left.
Yeah. There's like, far be it from me to quote Peter Thiel positively. Remember we talked about how he said that thing about how the left is like Christianity, but they don't forgive? I think there's like a lot of forgiveness on the left, but like there is this thing where like the right is extremely forgiving of hypocrisy because they actually just recognize that like it doesn't actually matter. I agree with what the homophobe is saying, whether they were on Grindr or not. I genuinely don't care, especially if they're admitting that it's wrong or whatever. Or like there's like a power in that type of, you can call it forgiveness, you can call it not giving a shit about your values in practice. You know, like it depends on the individual instance. I think like what's behind it. It could just be like political calculation to ignore a particular thing like that.
Also, I think a big part of this too is subordination to authority and political authority. It's like really core to right-wing values, is like to get behind the leader and to like get behind the system.
The leader. Yeah,
exactly. So
exactly.
there's a natural, on the authoritarian, anti-authoritarian split, the hypocrisy of authoritarians doesn't matter if you have a greater value in being subordinate to them and them being the leader, the dominator, and so on.
Yeah.
Whereas liberal left, whether or not they can fully enact it, they have at least a commitment to the idea of like
holding
unjust leadership.
accountable.
And exactly.
Yeah. No, totally.
So yeah, on the conservative versus liberal thing on hypocrisy, I feel like I kind of have it figured out, like why it works this way, which is that on one hand, you have liberals who are more theatrical people. They appreciate drama more. And they're also afraid of being duplicitous, two-faced, and so on, or they're afraid of being perceived that way. And conservatives tend to have a respect for the idea of subordination to authority, so their hypocritical leaders matter less to them. They're also committed to defeating the liberals. Like if you convince someone totally to be against some conservative position that they're voting for or whatever, they saw all the evidence and they're really genuinely convinced, there's still a decent chance that they might buy into it or defend it on the premise that you're able to stick it to Justin Trudeau, Barack Obama, or Schwab or whatever, you know, like sticking it to people by being under leader is part of the conservative value set. So it creates this kind of funny situation where conservatives kind of hold liberals as inherently hypocritical, like their position is itself hypocritical, like you're saying. And defeating them is so important that that's what makes it okay to say, for their leaders to say one thing and do another, or for them to say one thing and do another. So basically, we're allowed to be somewhat hypocritical because we are at war with the ultimate hypocrisy. And there's like a lesser evilism of hypocrisy there.
Yeah, like a real politique, like political calculation of, yeah, okay, maybe there was some hypocrisy there, but that's kind of beside the point. It's a small thing. It's one person. It's a one small aspect. Yeah, depending on how committed you are to beating someone, you will be more and more likely to ignore things on your own side.
Yeah. Liberals are hypocrites by definition, existentially. It's part of their very nature so much. And that's why it's okay for me to violate my values to defeat them. Like I need to say one thing and do another to beat the hypocrites. And like the question of why do conservatives use this against liberals if they don't care about it? And it's because they recognize it's the liberal weak spot. It's like liberals are obsessed with this thing that they're impervious. They're like Superman to hypocrisy. It just bounces off of them. And the liberals will wield it like a sword and it only hits themselves. So the reason that conservatives focus on hypocrisy at all is not because they love the theater. It's not because they find mugging for the camera like Jon Stewart funny. It's that they know that it helps destroy their enemies. It's a liberal weak spot. It's a particular liberal weak spot because liberals are for some reason willing to abide a very broad idea of what a person's claimed values are and compare it to what they do and so on. So then the question is like, what is the actual conservative weak spot? Like, what do they commit to that you do not as your lefty liberal person in the world? What bounces off of you and sticks to them? I don't have the answer to that question, but theoretically, it should exist.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully. I mean, if you just have fewer scruples or like, yeah, I can imagine a situation where there's like, it doesn't, but I don't know. I guess you have to see.
Yeah, it might not. It's worth thinking about, though. I leave it to you, dear audience. I think part of what makes it an issue is when people care about hypocrisy more than they care about the underlying values of that hypocrisy. Like, that's the political. The political is whether or not you're saying the right thing, whether you're doing the right thing, or whether you're saying the wrong thing and doing the wrong thing. It's the contradiction is less important. It's just more dramatic and fun and funny.
Yeah. The contradiction can either imply like a person who is not a hypocrite is either saying the right thing and doing the right thing. So they're like the best possible political actor or whatever in some way, or they're saying the wrong thing and doing the wrong thing. And they're like the worst possible political actor. Total integrity, not a hypocrite. Yeah. So it's like not being a hypocrite does not tell you whether a person is a positive or negative force in the political sphere, like at all.
Yeah, and if you think there's a distinction between the world we've inherited and the world that we should strive to create, then the hypocrisy framework is inherently conservative because it's easier to live according to the existing world than to live according to a world that does not yet exist in another system that has its own rules and logic.
Yeah, in a way, like, yeah, the progressive movement in a practical sense, it almost makes more sense to be more forgiving of hypocrisy because it's harder to live out your values in a society based on the values that you're against.
Yeah, no, that's it. That's the game. That's the thing. This has been bugging me for years about hypocrisy. It's a rigged game. It's not fair, man. You can't say that to us and you don't have to do it. No, but yeah, it has this inherently conservative bias because you can be more like Jeff Bezos is being consistent with his ultimate, total integrity.
Yeah.
Right. But the anti-Amazon activist who cares about people's wages and impacts on the environment and then has a Prime account anyway as well. On the hypocrisy scale, they're the piece of shit and Bezos is amazing. So if that's what the scale says, the scale's fucking broken morally.
Yeah. It diverts attention from the actual things that matter.
I looked up the etymology of hypocrisy and like some of the history of the word hypocrisy and stuff. And actually it was kind of clarifying a little bit on why we're in this situation. I'll just lay it out really quickly. The origin, hypocrisis or hypocrisis, I don't know. It's an ancient Greek word for actor that breaks down to below my choice or something like that. And below people, I saw people on the internet speculate it's like below under a mask. An ancient Greek term for actors being under a mask and pretending to be something became a social term for someone who is pretending to have values that they don't. And it entered English in the 1200s by the definition feigning virtue or goodness. So hypocrite didn't just mean pretend to be anything, it meant pretending to be good. And then over time, the common definition became pretending to believe what you don't actually believe or pretending to be something that you're actually not. And then finally, like the modern colloquial definition, the liberal ironist definition, acting in a way that's not consistent with your claimed ethics and beliefs.
That's interesting, the way that it's changed over time. It might help explain some of the reason that being a hypocrite does get so morally loaded, because if the definition originally has specifically to do with feigning virtue, it makes a bit more sense to like define hypocrisy as something to be looked down on inherently when the thing that you're trying to do is like a good thing.
It's almost kind of like hypocrite was the original word for virtue signaler. And the term virtue signaler on the modern day has that kind of implicit hypocritical narrative. Like the issue they have isn't that you're signaling virtue, it's maybe that you're signaling virtue you don't have.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that there's this inherent attack on progressive ideas, on ideas that challenge the existing order in this framework. Because in order to feign goodness, you need to somehow demonstrate quote unquote goodness. And left-wing politics is an attempt, and even if you disagree with left-wing politics, you probably agree, it is a sincere attempt to bring a political goodness to the world. And I guess it is true when you think about all like the hypocritical examples we give, like the homophobic priest is making a claim to virtue and goodness. But it's just their twisted, stupid version of goodness.
Yeah, I mean, any value a person claims to hold, they're going to, in their own framework, believe it to be good, unless they're Joker mode, which is pretty rare.
Yeah, Joker mode is rare.
It's a rare mode for humans to go into. Most of the time,
The standard mode is more like hypocrite mode,
Yeah.
which is that you have high aspirations for what is good and you strive to achieve those. You sometimes fail. You're sometimes not given the opportunity to live up to it, but you do your best. And the thing that we really tend to label as hypocrite is something more insidious than that. Like the strong definition of hypocrite is like someone who's really kind of knowingly misrepresenting themselves and their values while doing the most horrible thing. Like your outspoken male feminist who is like abusive.
yeah, not just made a joke, but yeah, abusing people. Yeah.
Not to downplay making jokes, because sometimes that could be really rough stuff too. But we're talking like, you know, 100 out of 100 hypocrisy in the colloquial sense.
Yeah, but like this abuser, this hypothetical abuser who professes to be a feminist, the contradiction there is not really important compared to the fact that he's an abuser. Like it's the doing bad things is the part that actually like really matters. I mean, like the contradiction matters in like a social sense. If someone is saying one thing and doing another, it's hard to trust them. You know, at least if someone's honest about how horrible they are, they're a straight shooter, you know what you're getting. It's not better in terms of like their effect on the world. It's more just like, I don't have to worry that you're lying to me, which is like one particular social thing that can be difficult when dealing with people. But like, again, like if they're doing horrible things and saying that they believe these horrible things, yeah, it's bad. Yeah.
Yeah, and when we think of like the emotional narrative of the hypocrite figure that we oppose and challenge, like really it's not even the contradiction in that example that matters most so much as the fact that we're talking about someone who's like a manipulative, lying person who's kind of like psychologically abusing you by strongly misrepresenting their values in order to gain relationship with you or something like that. And
I think that the other problem with the hypocrisy thing is it conflates that manipulative, psychologically abusive person with the person who genuinely believes something good and is striving for it, but like doesn't always live up to their values fully.
They made the calculus that they're going to keep Amazon Prime.
They made making like decisions about how you're going to live your life based on how much money you have or whatever. Yeah,
but that's psychologically abusive framework of like strongly misrepresenting. Like if you've known someone for years and they've misrepresented who they are the entire time, and then it like comes out later, well, this whole time, despite representing themselves as this great anti-racist advocate, it turns out that they've got a pseudonym. They're blogging on Stormfront about race war or something like that. Yeah, that's disturbing and it's fucked up. And part of the reason it's really fucked up is what they're doing. But I feel like we want to keep that extreme version of hypocrisy and just label it correctly. Maybe even just as simple as labeling it as like being a psychologically abusive serial liar with bad values. Like that is bad.
Yeah, totally. I'm not defending that.
But if someone is like a communist who watches reality TV shows that are arguably exploitative or whatever, and they even say, I probably shouldn't watch this crap, that person is just fine. It's not even on my radar in any way, you know, and it shouldn't be on anyone's radar in any way. But for some reason, we're using the term hypocrite to refer to both of these things. And I'm just not. So if we look at the broad definition of hypocrite, like we are all hypocrites inherently. Like we are trapped in this universe of hypocrisy as liberals, as these actors.
I mean, anyone with an ideal to live up to is going to fail at certain points and be a hypocrite. That's not like that's an everybody who believes in things.
Yeah,
thing.
I mean, if your belief is expansive in terms of responsibility, which it doesn't necessarily, like you could have the strong value that you should never punch someone in the face for no reason, and a lot of people are going to be able to live their whole lives never doing that.
Sure, yeah.
But if you have the strong value that no one should ever harm anyone else intentionally or unintentionally, or harm any sort of object or possession intentionally or unintentionally, and that's your framework, then you're permanently casting yourself to a world of hypocrisy. And I think that distinction also kind of matters of like when we're thinking of the moral universe and so on. So yeah, we're trapped as hypocrites in a couple ways. We're trapped as hypocrites in the sense that it is a necessity, if we have expansive values, to sometime deviate from them. The more values you have and the more expansive they are, the more it is necessary to sometimes deviate from them.
Yeah, and the more different they are than how society currently works or pressures people into working.
Yeah, exactly. And so like we don't live under the circumstances that we created ourselves. The environment isn't up to us. Certain social and political norms either we're forced to break from, or we can only partially break from, and that's just kind of locked in. And then also I think there's a necessity to have a gap between your real and declared aims in life, not all the time, but sometimes. So for example, you're applying for a job. There needs to be a gap between your real and declared aims. No one's going to hire you if you're like, I want this job because I really need money and I am going to go to the bathroom as much as possible. And
it seems like you could like slack off at this job really easy. Yeah. My friend told me he works at a similar job and you can slack off a lot. So that's why I'm applying for this. Hopefully I won't be here for too long because yikes. So I'm hoping for something better, but totally.
And I'm the type of guy who's going to really tap into the rhythms of this place and figure out what the maximum amount of non-work time is for my own sanity. So it's like a type of protest against the wages. Yeah, like that gap is beneficial to you. It's beneficial to the children that you're trying to feed. It's
yeah.
And that, like, you're forced into situations like that too. And you're smiling and saying thank you for the present that you don't like. And you're saying dinner was good to your in-laws when it wasn't. There's something weird about it. These types of both morally positive white lies and more kind of morally neutral, practical lies of life, or even lies by omission. And there's also important stuff like diplomacy and negotiations where you like just have to, in the game rules, have a gap between your real and declared aims. Like you can't live with total authenticity according to in every context. Like in negotiations, that is actually like, if you go into negotiations, you say my bottom line is this, like I'm only willing to do this or whatever, that's going to negatively affect you. So there's various social dynamics to various types of hypocrisy. And I think also actively feigning virtue in a way that you know that you don't have, morally wrong and weird and kind of creepy. But also we kind of are forced to like feign virtue by omission, by like not speaking up about our own shortcomings. And like, yeah, so in the broad definition of hypocrisy, I think there's a lot of different ways that we're kind of like trapped in this hypocritical matrix.
Yeah.
So I think maybe we should reject the idea of hypocrisy. Like, I think maybe the idea of hypocrisy is not designed with our best interests in mind as like a political species. It seems to be kind of depoliticizing in a way, focusing on the contradiction rather than the values themselves. Like the more I've thought about this, the more I've been like, maybe like all this together is really weird, right? Like it's not just your average neutral idea. It's like structurally politically biased towards the status quo in a way that harms ideas that deviate from the norm.
Yeah, it's structurally biased against people challenging the status quo, and it is structurally biased against people who are genuinely striving for something good but unable to achieve it, in favor of people who are genuinely striving for something bad and able to achieve it.
Which is often easier.
Yeah, exactly. And like, yeah, framing those things as good. And it's using the moral cachet of like dishonest, manipulative, abusive liars and how bad they are, and saying like, oh, everybody who doesn't have this perfect matchup is like, oh, some version of that. Maybe they're not fully that, but they're like a mini version of that. It's putting it all on one spectrum when they're like very different things, like being a dishonest, manipulative, abusive liar versus someone who has high ideals that because of the society you're in, you can't fully live up to, are two very different things. So yeah, like the category of hypocrisy being a catch-all for all of those things, and framing them as, if not equally bad, then on the same spectrum of bad, and then framing not being a hypocrite as inherently good when it can contain both the best and the worst people. Yeah, I agree. It's not a good political concept through which to view the world, and like, yeah, it's not a moral barometer worth maintaining.
Yeah, like you imagine some crazy like KKK Nazi guy, and you're like, well, say what you will about him, but at least he's not a hypocrite. He's totally committed to genocide. So,
Great.
I would rather take the liberal who's half bad on racism, but it's like
Yeah, like genuinely believes it, is trying, but like sometimes just has embedded ideas that still aren't great. Or
wait,
whatever. Like,
guys, the KKK Nazi guy. We found out he's been race mixing. Let's get him.
oh, now it's bad. Yeah.
His true colors came out.
Yeah. So like, yeah, rather than focusing on the contradiction, I think focusing on the actions themselves and the beliefs themselves and evaluating both.
Yeah, we were riffing on this of like, what is our alternate version? You know, like, should we reclaim hypocrite? Like, yeah, we're all hypocrites. Or should we be like, no, hypocrites are only that one specific manipulative thing and everyone else is free from hypocrisy.
Right.
Kind of leaning towards just like ignoring the term, like treating the term as a non-thing and just like criticizing the term, calling those specific people like manipulative, lying abusers, etc. And like weighing, like we have to weigh on the moral claims, not the contradictions. And so, okay, here's our pitch. Rather than hypocrite, there is something called exocrit, which is like a hypocrite except worse. And we've got a points-based system to determine whether or not you're a hypocrite or whether or not you're an exocrit. There's 1 point for what you say. Is what you say good or not? If what you say is good, you get 1 point. And then there's 2 points for what you do. Is what you do good on XYZ subject? You said the right thing. You said that we should oppose income inequality. And then how do you act? Do you act in a way that's consistent with achieving those aims? You can either get full points, which is 2, or half points, which is 1, where you're not perfectly aligned with it.
Yeah, so under this structure, a person who's saying the right thing and like doing the right thing in every instance gets a perfect 3 points. They're the best. They're not a hypocrite under the old definition, but that's irrelevant. And then
most critically, they're not an exocrit, which means they have at least 2 points.
And the Nazi KKK person who's openly committed to genocide and is willing to say it gets 0 out of 3 points on this scale.
Because he's both saying and doing the wrong things. So he is an exocrit.
Yeah, not a hypocrite, but is an exocrit. So I think this is a better scale than hypocrisy for deciding if people are good.
Yeah, and if the KKK guy, he's going out advocating for Nazism, but he's mixed in his personal life. He does stuff that he privately says, oh, they're not so bad. When he's talking about other races. But he's still advocating outwardly and organizing with the Nazi party. Well, that's 1 out of 3. You're still exocrit. Sorry,
it's still
bud.
bad, yeah.
There's
and likewise, the person who's saying all the right things but is this abusive, manipulative liar? Like, so they're really doing wrong things. To be like on that level, you got to be on the 2 points of doing the wrong thing scale. You're still an exocrit. You're still.
Yeah, and I don't want these points, like, let's not get too, rationalist
we
specific.
have to be specific. We have to assign everybody points on everything.
There's an art to it. I think there's got to be an art to it a little bit, and different people are going to have different definitions of who meets what threshold.
It's got to be pattern grid world, baby. We got to define it perfectly.
Then we need to increase the amount of points. To
it's got to be at least like a 2, 3 maybe, or
1,000 saying points and 2,000 doing points, so you can get into the exact. You need at least 2,000 points. No, I just say let's approach it with a little artistry.
Just another lovely day walking down the street, and oh look, a cute little innocent baby. Well, let me just stab it to death. Kill the baby.
Hey, whoa, what are you doing?
I just stabbed this baby to death.
Why? What the fuck's wrong with you? What the?
Oh, no, don't worry. It's actually my ideology that it's good to stab as many babies as possible. So it's completely consistent with what I believe. I don't want you to get the wrong idea here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's totally internally consistent.
Right, you were worried that I was a hypocrite, but I'm not.
Yeah, no, because most people are against stabbing babies.
Right.
I assume
So
you
you
were.
were running up like, I think I see a hypocrite. I totally get it. I get it all the time.
No,
Don't
yeah, there's
worry.
no, actually, let me just clarify. There's no hypocrisy here at all.
Right.
So I have no problem with this. And actually, I just want to say I admire your integrity.
Thank you.
I often
Yeah.
struggle maintaining consistency
Right,
between
with
my
your
values and my
Right.
actions.
I don't, actually.
Like I'll say, it's best if everyone doesn't jaywalk. But then sometimes I'm in a rush and I jaywalk, or, I
Right.
go, at the end of the yellow light when you probably shouldn't go, but you can kind of squeak in.
Yeah.
I get annoyed when other people do that, but sometimes I will do that myself as
Yeah,
well.
and I do both of those things, but I think that everyone should whenever they want. So
That's
completely
actually what's so
consistent.
incredible about you.
Yeah.
I have to say I'm inspired just meeting you.
People have that reaction a lot. They're inspired by me.
Well, nice to meet you, sir. Bye.
Bye. All right, just walking along. Hey, another baby. Get out my knife, sharpening it, hovering above the baby.
Wait, what are you doing, man? Don't stab that baby.
Oh, don't worry about it. I overheard he believes stabbing babies is good. He's not a hypocrite. It's totally fine.
Oh, thank God. I was worried there for a second. Okay, well, have a great day. Good to meet you. I admire your integrity, honestly.
Thank you. Pulling the knife back. And...
Actually, wait.
Wait, oh, yes?
I'm just gonna be honest. I feel like stabbing babies, innocent babies, is wrong.
Yeah, most people do believe that, but I don't.
No, but I think it's even wrong for you to do, even if you would believe it's not wrong, because it harms a baby. Like, even harming an adult would be wrong, but a baby in particular, like, they're innocent, they have a whole life ahead of them. And
Why would it be wrong if I...
because it maims the baby, it splits open the baby, it kills the child in a grotesque way. And
You've never killed a baby? You've never done this? Just walked up with a knife and stabbed
No,
it, or directly caused a baby to die?
yeah, no, I'm not a hypocrite at all. I've never killed any babies, ever. And I never would. I'm really am against it.
But can you really be sure that you're not a hypocrite at all? Like you've never purchased an item from Walmart or any place where child labor might have been used in the process, or even labor that might have hurt some baby's mother and the baby was hurt by that and killed?
Well, I would definitely do my due diligence whenever I can to avoid that kind of thing.
Have you ever voted in favor of a candidate who voted in favor of going to a war where babies ended up dying? Like, can you really say you're not a hypocrite at all in any way? You've 100% never caused harm to a baby, even once?
I've never killed a baby, but I mean, it's hard to say about every externality, and it's not all traced. And I mean,
Yeah, that's what I thought. Wow.
hey, that guy opposes the killing of babies, but likely participated in the indirect killing of babies in some way. He said one thing and he did another.
There's nothing worse than that.
Thinks he's so great, and then he goes around killing babies.
I can't believe the hypocrisy.
Hypocrite!
Liar!
Abuser!
Mind if we borrow your knife? We gotta get this guy. Oh, yeah, sure.
Stab him to death!
He deserves it. Hypocrite.
He's the worst among us!
It's our number one value in this society. We're against hypocrisy. Not so great now, are you?
Look at him. Stabbed like one of his own victims. Scumbag.
Hey, guys, do you mind giving me my knife back now? I have more babies I want to go kill.
Hey, it's the guy with a lot of integrity! Praise him!
Let's lift him up on our shoulders and give him 3 cheers. Hip, hip, hooray!
Hooray!
Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray!
You know, I don't like the stabbing of babies, but at least he's honest about it.
He's a straight shooter, you know? You know what you're getting.
That's our thoughts on hypocrisy, folks. That's pretty much what we have to say on this. I've always felt like there's something wrong with that. Noticing these sort of things. Like, why does it seem to work that with like these conservative figures, you're either saying, well, at least he's not a hypocrite, or you're saying, well, he's a hypocrite anyways. Let's focus on our people. It's like this is a tool aimed at our people. The liberals and the leftists, they're wielding this sword that only hits themselves, and it just bounces off of them. It bounces off the authoritarians, the social conservatives, the racist, sexist, transphobic, anti-disability pieces of shit assholes who are well funded by big corporations and politics and so on. Like it just never matters to them for some reason.
Yeah.
Or we're saying, look at him, he's gay, we caught him. And it's like, what, do we even want to be playing that game either, right? Like where you're reinforcing their, oh, well, Elon Musk claims to be racist, but he really wants to let in all these immigrants. Got him. It's like, well, how much do we want to be banging the drum of like, if Elon was against letting in more?
Yeah, it would be better or something, or like we wouldn't have got him. Yeah, where it's like
It's
what Elon
depoliticizing.
is advocating for is bad. Like in general, his general set of beliefs are bad, regardless of whether his interests in terms of his company sometimes lead him to want to be pro-immigration in an extremely limited way that gives employers too much control over the people that they're helping to bring in.
Yeah, and that's a class framework that's actually political. It's like a real discussion. When you're like, oh, there's a gap between rich MAGA and poor MAGA, which is class. And the class distinctions are that rich MAGA wants to exploit foreign workers more, and poor MAGA wants to keep foreign workers out. And like, that's a political discussion. But if you're just like, oh, he says this, but then he does this, it's like you've depoliticized it. You're just mugging for the camera and you're saying like, caught him.
You're saying in the dramatic arc of the story of Elon Musk, there was just a reveal that like his character wasn't who he thought he was. And
Yeah,
like
so we
it's
can-
interesting narratively in a story, but it's not the political issue, yeah, you were just talking about.
Yeah, and has there ever been a time where this worked? We're pointing and laughing at the dramatic reveal and all laughing together and mugging for the camera has disempowered someone who is coming to threaten things that you care about. The environment has been more protected because we caught CEOs contradicting themselves or something, or right-wing politicians that got caught being too liberal, so therefore they lost their power. Like, no, it's not political that way. It's a gag. And it's funny. It's a good gag. On a gag front, we should continue with that. It's great. But
Yeah, sure. But yeah, keeping the focus on the actual issues and not the lining up or whatever of these two things, yeah, it's the right way to go about this.
so that's all the time we have this week. Please do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you feel like supporting the show, we've got a Patreon account where you can donate $6 a month and get bonus episodes, etc. It makes a huge difference for us. We can't do the show without you. And sound off in the comments on Patreon, YouTube, all the social medias and stuff. And yeah, really curious what you think about this subject. We're going to try to find time to respond to comments that we get on the show. So take this opportunity to have your voice be counted. We'll we'll be talk more soon.
See ya.
Seriously? Seriously?
Boys are stupid.
Seriously?
Wrong. Wrong. Wrong.
Seriously?
Are they wrong?
I think they're wrong 100%. Sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they're wrong.
Seriously?
They're always wrong.
That is absolute
Wrong.
Seriously?
Is so wrong. Wrong. Very nice words, but happens to be wrong.
Seriously?
Seriously? Seriously?
Wrong.